Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into some seriously radical philosophical blueprints. We're looking at two texts written in 2013 and 2015 by an author named Switch Fang. And let me tell you, these texts don't just suggest a few minor tweaks to human society. They propose a total top-to-bottom overhaul. We're talking global politics, personal ambition, the whole shebang. To really wrap our heads around the scope of this, we have to look at the author's core premise, which is basically that the fundamental ways we currently organize humanity are just flawed. They are built to produce inevitable misery. So from the macro level of international borders, right down to the micro level of your own family unit, these texts argue for a complete systemic reset. It's like hitting the ultimate refresh button on civilization. We're going to break down the historical context and the specific lifestyle frameworks proposed in these documents to see exactly how the author believes we can build a completely friction-free society.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the history of human suffering. Then we'll look at reconstructing global order. After that, we'll dive into the illusion of success, map out the ideal life stages, and finally wrap up with achieving the vision.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the history of human suffering, and why the author believes we're dealing with a fundamentally broken system. So get this, according to the 2015 text, 95% of all people who have ever lived on this planet, both in the past and today, have experienced distress, pain, sorrow, anxiety, and fear as the primary defining traits of their existence. 95%. That is a staggering number. The author backs this up by pointing to our historical record of continuous wars, systemic inequality, and just the heavy daily psychological burdens most individuals carry throughout their lifespans. But here's the twist. Instead of viewing suffering as a natural byproduct of the human condition or some kind of individual failure, the text frames this 95% metric as a symptom of a massive systemic disease. The argument is basically this: if the vast majority of human experience across all cultures and eras is defined by profound anxiety, well then the fault lies not with the people, but with the structural design of civilization itself. And the natural conclusion he draws from all that pervasive suffering, that our traditional value systems and the very order of our lives have completely failed us. The text argues that we can't just slap a Band-Aid on this. Minor reforms, policy tweaks, changing who holds political power, it's all entirely insufficient, because the foundational code of human society is corrupted. Previous attempts to improve the human condition failed because they still relied on the same old, flawed paradigms: hoarding resources, drawing territorial boundaries, and using hierarchical power structures. So the author issues a call to just abandon these legacy systems entirely. Think of it like this. You can't simply repair a house with a rotting foundation. You literally have to tear it down to the dirt to completely rebuild our values and our entire order of production and life from scratch.
Which brings us to Section 2, reconstructing global order. Let's zoom out and take a macro view.
The texts outline three very specific and honestly highly radical pillars that the author claims are absolutely necessary to establish world peace and end all that historical suffering. First up, abolishing traditional marriage and family models entirely. The author argues that the nuclear family inevitably breeds selfishness, because individuals prioritize their immediate relatives over the collective good, which leads straight to resource hoarding and tribalism. The second pillar is the enforcement of absolute global transparency. No more secrets. The texts argue that secrecy is the exact breeding ground for corruption and conflict. So under this pillar, every single affair, from top-level government operations down to small social groups, has to operate entirely in the open. And finally, a complete overhaul of global governance. Instead of locally elected officials who are beholden to nationalistic interests, the text proposes that regional administrative officials be appointed directly by the United Nations, theoretically shifting allegiance away from the nation-state and toward the entire global population.
Okay, to really visualize what this third pillar looks like in practice, the text lays out this wild, unconventional world leader swap. Check this out. The text actually suggests appointing Vladimir Putin to administer North America, Barack Obama for the Middle East, and Xi Jinping for the European Union. Wow, right? The author outlines this concept as a deliberate mechanism to entirely disrupt entrenched local politics and nationalistic biases. By forcing leaders to govern regions entirely outside their native cultural and political spheres, the text argues it severs their ties to local power bases and historical grievances. The underlying logic is actually pretty fascinating. If an administrator has zero inherent biological or cultural ties to a specific region, they'll be forced to govern based on objective global protocols rather than localized favoritism, which theoretically opens up brand new pathways for standardized global management.
Moving on to Section 3, the illusion of success. Now we're shifting from global reconstruction down to a micro view.
To fully grasp the author's critique of personal ambitions, the 2013 text anchors its argument with an old historical proverb from the Qing dynasty. In the Qing dynasty, a virtuous magistrate for 3 years, amassing 100,000 silver taels. The author relies on this proverb to basically deconstruct our traditional pursuit of education, wealth, and official status. Think about what this is saying. The text is pointing out that historically, even a supposedly honest or virtuous official was expected, by the very design of the system, to extract a massive fortune from their position. This is used to highlight exactly how our traditional definitions of success are deeply, inextricably intertwined with systemic corruption and this endless, insatiable thirst for material accumulation that ultimately serves zero spiritual purpose.
The text then paints this incredibly vivid picture, describing traditional ambition as thousands of troops and horses passing a single log bridge. I mean, what a metaphor! It perfectly captures the intense psychological toll of living in a hyper-competitive society. Whether we're talking about ancient imperial exams or today's modern corporate ladder and academic systems. The author argues that in this frantic pursuit of wealth and status, an individual's youth is entirely consumed by endless studying and fierce competition. In this brutal paradigm, many individuals inevitably get injured, they fall off into the river, or they just plain drown under the immense societal pressure. Furthermore, the text claims that even those rare few who successfully cross that log bridge usually arrive at their destination totally exhausted, older, and realizing they've entirely bypassed the actual joy of living.
So the text draws a really sharp contrast here. On the one hand, we have the heavy burden of traditional success, defined primarily by fortune, high official positions, fame, and material wealth. The author argues that dedicating your lifespan to these goals is just a tragic misallocation of human energy that inevitably results in anxiety and spiritual emptiness. But on the other hand, there is the proposed alternative definition of new success, living healthily, peacefully, smoothly, and freely with constant joy. This framework completely divorces the idea of success from external validation or material hoarding. Instead, it prioritizes internal peace and physiological well-being as the absolute only true metrics of a blessed life, arguing that removing that competitive drive is literally the only way to achieve lasting fulfillment.
So what does this actually look like in practice? That brings us to Section 4, the ideal life stages, charting a new path.
The author doesn't just critique the old system, he actually provides a concrete, alternative timeline for an ideal human lifespan designed to facilitate this new definition of success. In this progression, childhood is an era entirely dedicated to unfiltered joy, completely absent of academic pressure. Then youth is reserved strictly for play, exploration, and discovering your natural passions without the burden of career preparation. Young adulthood becomes the designated time for pursuing dreams and conceptualizing ideals. Middle age, and this is key, is the specific contained window where diligent work and societal contribution should occur. Finally, old age is strictly reserved for leisure, reflection, and self-care. This highly structured sequence is designed to deliberately dismantle that stressful, single-log bridge model, replacing the continuous, lifelong grind with a compartmentalized flow that respects the natural psychological and physical evolution of the human body.
And finally, Section 5, Achieving the Vision, the ultimate goal.
Okay, so reading through these sweeping macro and micro proposals naturally leaves us with a massive logistical question regarding implementation. How do we actually do this? Well, the text itself builds toward this by asking a climactic rhetorical question. Where is this path? By posing this, the author forces the reader to really consider whether it's actually possible to manifest this vision of global restructuring and personal peace within the confines of our current reality, or if it requires an entirely separate ecosystem.
And here is the final answer revealed in the text, in the second home created by Lifechanyuan. This is the concrete, physical framework the author Shuifeng claims implements these unconventional ideas and structures. It heavily challenges our most deeply held notions about global governance, the utility of the nuclear family, and exactly how we measure personal success over a lifetime. Whether you view this framework as a functional blueprint for human harmony or as a radical departure from human nature, it definitely forces us to ask, if our current systems are truly causing as much suffering as the text claims, what are we genuinely willing to fundamentally change to fix them? It's a lot to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.